Thank you, Julie. Um, I have met Cara before. Cara spoke to our age-friendly meeting back in January before all this stuff started. And it was a greatly attended meeting, plus there was a lot of debate. I'm sure there might be some debate today. Cara Silletto is an MBA. She works with companies across the country to reduce unnecessary employee turnover by bridging generational gaps and making leaders more effective in their roles. And so today I think she's going to talk about something we're probably all interested in, the millennial impact on the workplace, but I'm sure she'll cover a lot of other subjects. She's got a great deal of energy and is a great speaker, and I'm sure you'll enjoy her. So with that, here is Cara.
Thank you so much, Larry. It's so great to be here. I happen to live on the sunny side of Louisville in Jeffersonville, born and raised here. And so I always love working with leaders in our area and had a great conversation, as Larry said, with the group in January. So please feel free to put your chat, put comments, questions, anything into the chat. I'm going to do my best to present and also manage that. And so if, feel free to ping me, somebody else, Jess or Julie or anyone else, if you see something I need to slow down for. I'll try to leave time at the end as well for just questions if you have a general question that's not time sensitive. But I wanted to talk with you today about, of course, exploring the millennial mindset, which I happen to be one of the oldest millennials. So I was born in 1981. I am 38, almost 39 years old. So when you think about millennials, it's not the new hires anymore. We are pushing 40. So it's a whole different group now that's coming in. Generation Z is the new graduates. But as of today, it depends on the researcher that you follow and the reports that you look at. But most researchers agree that the millennials are now around age 22 to 39, give or take. So you're looking at that group that does have some business experience versus the brand new hires coming in that are teenagers or right out of college. That's going to be more Generation Z. So a lot of what I talk about today will certainly apply to Gen Z. But the reason I still focus on the millennial mindset for business leaders is because that is the majority of our new hires are between 22 and 39 years old. A ton of the new folks you're bringing in are probably in that age range. So we have a little booklet here, and I will make sure you guys get this in a follow-up email. You can get the digital copy. It's called The Millennial Mindset. And so you can get a copy of that, the digital one, and then also on our website, wereduceturnover.com, then you can actually ask for this physical copy, and we mail those out for free for you. So if you want to have one for your pocket, your purse, things like that, it's just a quick 10-minute read. Some of the stories I'm going to share today are in that little pocket guide, and then there's some other insights as well. I see a lot of familiar faces today, which is great. Some of you may have heard me speak in the past. Some of you I've known for years, but you haven't heard me do any of this work. And so if you have heard me before, I'll probably tell a couple stories that you might sound familiar to you, but I'm definitely going to make sure that our conversation today is also very COVID relevant of what's happening with the workforce and the millennials in the workforce and all of that stuff. So feel free to ask specific questions related to today. Of course, our whole world has been shaken by this pandemic, as well as the protesting, social unrest, different things like that have really caused a lot of our priorities to shift as leaders today and over these last several months. So happy to make sure that everything still applies. We've tweaked a lot of our strategies and things, but to be honest, what we've been teaching for leaders about the ability to attract and retain talent today and to create a place where people want to work, it's interesting to me because a lot of the strategies that we've been teaching for years are now even more important, such as flexibility. What does that look like? Work from home used to be a perk, or it used to be yeah, we can't do that in our business. And then all of a sudden, businesses were forced to get over that barrier, to get past those technical obstacles that they thought they had. And so I've been preaching for years that we have a lot more flexibility than we initially think we do in most cases. So I think to some extent this pandemic is gonna really force us to be more flexible as leaders and as organizations. Here's one that's extremely relevant right now. All of the schools are announcing their fall schedule. So if you are an employer, flexibility is going to be key to keeping your people. For example, my school that my son goes to, they have decided to go back 3 days a week in order to cut the classes in half. So it'll be 2 to 3 days a week. And the parents are expected to do e-learning those other 2 to 3 days a week this fall. Now, we're at a charter school, but the public district here in Jeffersonville, they decided to go back all 5 days, but they're taking the month of December off because they feel that the next wave for the pandemic is going to happen when it gets colder outside. And so now you've got some of your employees who are dealing with 2 to 3 days of childcare that they have to now manage. Then you've got other parents and your employees who now have the month of December, their kids are off. So how are they going to manage a whole month? Actually, it's 6 weeks because they do 2 weeks of e-learning and 4 weeks off. So how are they going to manage 6 weeks with children at home and still do their job, right? So one of the biggest things that every leader has to do today is get to know their people. We have to get to know what we're dealing with here. What is the current situation? What is their reality? Not just the school thing, but there's a lot of stuff going on with the fear of COVID exposure, with the childcare issues. Right now, we still have this $600 a week unemployment issue, which is keeping a lot of folks out of the workforce because they're not going to go back and find a job until that $600 a week runs out in some cases. That, of course, applies more for my clients that have lower wage workers. But we've got a ton going on. Not to mention, Target just announced they are going $15 an hour across the board minimum wage for all employees all the way across the country. So if you happen to be an employer with lower wage workers, that's an issue because now they could potentially go to Target and make more than they were making at the manufacturing place or the call center or the nursing home or whatever type of business that you maybe aren't even paying 15 or just paying around that range. So a lot of stuff going on right now. A lot of things have been shaken up, but we're just going to dive into some things that I believe business leaders really need to think differently about, and I'm going to help you get the inside scoop of how this new workforce thinks, where they're coming from, and how different that is, okay? So, all right, there are 2 different types of employees that I'm seeing today. We have one group that I call the trees. Now, the trees are deep rooted, okay? They have been there for a long time. If you think about your company, who is it that's been there a long time? They are probably not going anywhere, even if you want them to, okay? They are really grounded in that organization. They either feel obligated to the company or just feel a sense of loyalty to that, or maybe they have what we call golden handcuffs. Now, golden handcuffs, it could be something that is keeping them there and really doesn't allow them to go somewhere else, such as a big cushion of paid time off. They have a big old cushion of, weeks worth of paid time off that they have accumulated. Oh, and by the way, they're also, since they've been there 10 plus years, they're getting 3, 4, 5 weeks a year of paid time off. And they know that if they changed and went somewhere else, not only do they have to go back down to 2, maybe 3 weeks if they're lucky of paid time off starting somewhere new, they also lose that cushion. Poof, it's gone, right? They're going to lose that cushion and support that they really liked having as backup in case they needed it. So I talk about this because So many times I hear that, oh, young workers today, they're not loyal. They have no sense of obligation to the company and whatnot. But if we really think about why people stay, sometimes they stay because they love their job. They love the people they serve. They love the team that they're on, their boss, the mission, any of those things. Sometimes that's it. But other times it's because of those golden handcuffs, or they're making so much money and they can't make that much money elsewhere. Sometimes it's not a loyalty thing. It could be an I'm stuck kind of thing, that's why they're there. Or there's also a chance of they just don't like change, right? Have you ever heard somebody say the phrase, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't? Right? I had a boss who said that years ago to me, and then I realized what it meant. It meant he wasn't happy with the current situation, but he was unwilling to change because he said it could be worse. If we make a change, like I know how to deal with this craziness that I deal with. If I go somewhere else, it could be worse, and then I won't even know how to navigate it. Right? So he wasn't willing to change. And I learned over time, he did not care for change in general, right? Now, that same situation where someone is not happy and uncomfortable and this isn't a fit for me, right? The same thing that one person will deal with and manage, a millennial mindset looks at that and says, oh, come on, I'm not dealing with this. The grass has got to be greener somewhere else. And we tend to have a much more optimistic outlook on other options because we have more risk tolerance as well. We tend to be willing to take those risks, take those leaps. And if we go back to, remember the trees we talked about that are deep rooted, the younger the worker, the less work experience they have, they can't possibly be deep rooted with 10, 15, 20 years of experience somewhere. And they haven't built up those cushions of paid time off and seniority and other things, that come over time, right? Within the hierarchy and whatnot. So instead, we've got the trees who are deep rooted. And then you have this other part of our workforce, the other side is what we consider the revolving door, right? You see that. You see the newer workers, they come in, they don't stay near as long as we think they should stay. They don't stay near as long as their predecessor was there, right? Whether it's I've seen people in a receptionist type job that the receptionist was there for 20 years, 20 plus years. And then in the last 5 years since she retired, we've had 4 receptionists in that position because that position has now become not only a revolving door, but merely a stepping stone for someone. Sometimes people in the past, they treated that job as a career. Here's a general example for you. A bank teller. A bank teller job used to be a career for people. Your mom knew her bank teller and her bank teller knew your mom, right? They knew each other because they were always there. They had that long relationship. Now with my banking clients, they will tell me that the bank teller job for the new hires is seen as a stepping stone. It is a stepping stone job while they're in school to do something else, or while they're wanting to become a loan officer or a branch manager or something like that. So if you think about what positions in your organization have become a revolving door of those roles, or a stepping stone for people where they're just using that to get their foot in the door, or they're using that to get to the next level, or just to gain skills. And then as soon as they've got what they want, then they're going to move on from that. Our world moves so fast today compared to what it was. Right? It used to be people were patient, people waited, people took time, they paid their dues, they waited their turn, things like that. And our world has just evolved so much faster over the years that we as leaders have to understand the younger workforce is in that mindset of, okay, go, next, let's upgrade, let's go, right? Because that's what we grew up with. I'd like for you to think about for a second this concept of the trees versus the revolving door, okay? Take an inventory real quick of your own team, your organization. What would the ratio be? What percent would you put in each bucket? Are you 50-50 trees versus revolving doors? And I can't give you a number or a timeline on when they become a tree, because younger businesses, it might be a smaller time. Other businesses, if you've been around a long, long time, it might be a much bigger number. But just think about for a minute, how many people or how many positions do you have that are trees versus revolving door? Okay. Do you have that number in your head? You got a ballpark there? Okay. Now, next question is, how about 5 years from now? How about 5 years from now? What's going to happen? Will you have as many trees? Or will you have more or less revolving doors? Every leadership team that I work with, every single one of them realizes at this point that their trees are retiring, that many of the trees are leaving their organizations or will be soon, not all of them, but a good chunk of those folks. And if somebody is a tree and they've been there 10, 20, 30 years at the organization, they can no longer expect that their replacement person is going to be there the same 10, 20, 30 years, because that's not the employer-employee relationship any longer. Most new hires that come into an organization, they do not think they are going to retire from that organization. Heck, I just talked to a leadership team the other day, and I had to shake them a little bit and say, stop saying, where do you see yourself in 5 years? 5 years, are you kidding? 5 years is like an eternity to a young worker, because that's like asking me, where do I see myself in 25 years? There's no difference. Things are changing so fast. In 5 years, I could have a new husband. I could live in a different city. I have no idea where I'm going to be in 5 years. So instead, we have to recalibrate our mindset when we're hiring folks, when we're mentoring folks, as we're trying to retain folks. We have to recalibrate our mindset to what is realistic today. What is realistic? Now, some of my clients have lower wage workers and they're struggling with 30, 60, 90-day turnover. Okay, I do a ton of work in senior care, manufacturing, some of those areas, call centers and whatnot. And so in that space, they might be looking at a realistic goal of, 6 months is a win right now, because so many people are just job hopping. Or maybe the 1 year mark, or their golden ticket is like 18 months. If they can get somebody to stay in that position 18 months, that's fabulous. The key is just be realistic about it. Because if we say, well, we need people to stay 3 years, but nobody's even hitting the 18-month mark, then you're just going to keep banging your head against the wall, frustrated that nobody's staying long enough. Well, at that point, I work with those clients to say, we need to rethink our model here. We need to rethink the workforce structure, the staffing, the scheduling, how we're doing all of that, and be realistic about how much training they need, how long that's going to take, how do we get them up to productivity and profitability to help the company, right? Because so many businesses, they were very profitable and sustainable based on a traditional model of, I hire you, you come in, you get better and faster at the job, you do it over and 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 again, you be happy about it because I paid you a paycheck, and then you retire when I'm ready for you to leave. That type of thing. And that's not happening anymore. That's not that employer-employee relationship today. So we really have to think about what that relationship looks like now and be more realistic. Now, many of you on the call today, you have higher skilled, higher paid workers. So you're saying, oh, Cara, I don't have like 90-day turnover. I'm just mad that I have somebody who's really talented and they leave after 5 years. and I needed them to stay 10 years. Well, let me ask you, whether you're losing people at 90 days or at 5 or 6 years, and you need them to stay longer, what are you doing to keep them longer? What are you putting out there as an incentive for them? What are you putting out there as a carrot on a stick for them to stay? Why in the world would they stay longer if, for example, I'm not pointing any fingers here, but I hear that a lot of companies are only budgeting 2 to 3% for pay increases. That's what our clients tell us. Yep, Cara, 2 to 3%. Well, that's interesting because if you look back at history, people who got raises 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they were getting 8 to 10% raises if they were a really strong performer. Then anytime in the data, it shows us anytime there has been a recession of any kind, those raises have decreased and never recovered. So it went from 8 to 10% increases to 5 to 7% to 3 to 5%, down to 2 to 3%. Heck, some of my clients budget a 1.5% raise each year for people. That's not a raise. That's not even a cost of living adjustment, which means if that person stays on your payroll for, let's say, 3-4 years without a true promotion and bump in pay, they are making less money 4 years later than when they started because the price of milk went up, price of gas went up, the rent went up. All the things that they're paying for have traditionally gone up during that time. So we cannot, as business leaders, think that we can keep people with a 2 to 3% pay increase and a model of, well, just pay your dues, stick it out, kiddo, and you'll get noticed, you'll get seen, and you'll get a promotion down the road like I did. You know, I had to work 5 to 7 years in a position before they'd even talk to me about a promotion. Well, that's not going to fly today. You're going to lose people because the world moves fast and a ton of people are hiring. I know in January we talked about the market and the fact that in January, if you'll take a step back in time to January with me, in January we were in an employees market. Just like the real estate market, you know, sometimes it's a buyer's advantage, sometimes it's a seller's advantage. In January, we were in an employees market. Everybody was hiring. It was really hard to get and keep talent without them job hopping or getting poached by your competitors, things like that. Now, of course, pandemic hits, boom, everything changed, tons of unemployment all of a sudden. But what I'm seeing, this is very interesting to me, now this employer-employee market transition, it depends on the industry you're in and what city or state region that you are in. Because I have New York clients where in parts of New York that have not reopened, and they're saying, well, we're not losing anybody, Cara. We don't have recruiting or retention problems. But that's because all their restaurants and retail and everything else is shut down, and people just want the security of the job they have, if they have it. Then in other areas, I'm talking to people in that same exact industry in a different region, like here in the Louisville market, and they are saying, Cara, oh my goodness, now that all the restaurants and retail and everybody's back open, there are several people hiring. Of course, it depends on your pay level and the expertise that you're looking for. If it's a less skilled role and a lower wage worker, we're back in an employees market because Walmart, Target, Amazon, Kroger, everybody like that is hiring. If it's a higher skilled position, again, it just depends on your industry and whether your industry took a hit revenue-wise. Some businesses are killing it, right? Some manufacturers are still booming because maybe they're supporting pandemic equipment or efforts and things like that, while other manufacturers are still completely shut down because they don't have any revenue right now if their industry got hit. So right now it's just a very interesting market because it's more based on your region, your industry, your size, things like that. But keep an eye on that because you have to think about who your real competitors are. So, all right. So let's talk specifically. That was more about the market and about about those things, let me check Larry's comment here. Cara, some people can't wait to retire and others keep working until 75 or even 80. Any changes in that trend with COVID? Great question. I'm seeing it go both ways. Some people want the stability and they are wanting to work longer because maybe their financials got hit, or they just want to keep working. Some folks are wanting to keep working longer. Others, I have already seen people retire early because of COVID, because they don't want to be exposed to the COVID risk at work, or the biggest thing I'm seeing of that age and a lot of ages is just a reset of priorities, a reset of, you know what, being a workaholic is not worth it. I am going to quit. I don't know where my path is going to go next. I will find something, but you know what? I'm going to take a few months off, spend it with my family, and rethink my life and my priorities. I have a ton of people in my life who are doing that right now and who are planning on either quitting their jobs soon or they already have. They're rethinking, I think I just want to go part-time, or I only want to work somewhere that's going to be at home. I don't want to commute anymore. Things like that. So COVID's definitely shifting those mindsets for sure. But great question. Okay, so let's talk about this generational piece here. We have the baby boomers were 80 million strong. Huge, huge cohort. Of course, that's why it was called the baby boom. But the baby boomers are retiring about 6,000 a day in the States. Now, I haven't seen in the past few months if that number, like Larry was asking, has gone up or down. But in the past couple years, it was an average of about 6,000 a day. So that number from a workforce standpoint is dropping, and we're getting less and less boomers in the workforce each day. The group right behind them, the Gen Xers, a lot of people don't realize they were much smaller at about 60 million versus the 80 million boomers here. And many of the boomers were like my father. Now, my father was an attorney for 42 years here in Clark County, and he was a workaholic. He worked nights, weekends, he had his own practice, he was his own boss. He would say things like, "I'm sorry, babe, I can't come to your game tonight. I gotta work," right? And it was self-imposed. He didn't have a boss telling him to do that. That was just his schedule for himself. So we had this workaholic generation, and of course, not all boomers were, but a ton of people built successful companies, successful careers. They really wanted to grow their career, grow their company over time. And those boomers then mentored this next group of Gen Xers. Now, the Gen Xers were born approximately 1965 to 79, okay? So in case you're wondering which group you fall in, the boomers, of course, were 1946 to 64. That's pretty well set. Gen X and millennials or Gen Y, there's a little bit more of a gray area between that. But many of the Gen Xers who were a smaller group, they didn't have the strength in numbers to push back on the baby boomers. They didn't have the strength to say, "No, I'm not going to wear pantyhose," right? They didn't have that opportunity. And instead, most of the Gen Xers that I talk to, they will tell me that they learned pretty early in their career if they wanted to succeed, they were going to have to play the boomer game and follow the rules of this big giant boomer cohort that was ahead of them. So most of the Gen Xers fell in line and they did what the boomers told them in regards to professionalism and work ethic, okay? If we think about those terms are subjective. It is your opinion whether you think purple or blue or pink hair is professional or unprofessional. It is your opinion if you think someone has a strong work ethic versus not a strong work ethic. And it's going to be based on the way you were raised. It's based on your upbringing and what your parents and your first mentors taught you. I've got a lot of clients that will say things like, I was always taught if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late. That's not true. If you're 3 minutes early, you're 3 minutes early. And if you're on time, you're on time. But if it was ingrained in you as a child, you were taught, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late, then you're going to believe that for the rest of your life. And then if anybody else comes in at 2 till or slides in right on time, in your head, you're judging them thinking, well, they're late. How dare they come in at 1 minute till? You're supposed to be here at 5 minutes till. But those folks weren't raised like you. They didn't have your mother or father, and they can't read your mind. So they don't know that that is your expectation or your definition of work ethic or punctuality, okay? But the Gen Xers pretty much adopted the baby boomer expectations because, again, they were so much smaller. There were some Gen Xers who were more free spirit. I know several. I think there's a few on the call today. But, you know, they took a different path and they said, no, I'm not going to wear pantyhose and I want to have blue hair. And, you know, they did their own thing. But most of those Gen Xers fell in line and accommodated the boomer expectations. So here's the game changer, folks. If you didn't already know this, we had the 80 million boomers, 60 million Gen Xers, and then there's 80 million millennials. So we have this hourglass of demographics here where the millennials are now the largest group in the workforce. In fact, we outnumber the boomers and Xers combined. We outnumber both of them. So the millennials, this is why we see such an impact of the millennials on the workforce, because the millennials are going arm in arm saying, we're not going to wear pantyhose. We want purple hair. We want to work from home. And if you won't let us work from home, we will find an employer who will, right? That kind of mentality. And yes, it's entitlement. Yes, it is not deserved, right? We haven't worked in the workplace long enough to deserve to call the shots, but we have strength in numbers. And in some cases, the workforce evolved, but the employers didn't. They didn't update their policies and procedures and their, you know, hiring practices and attire policies and their work environment, and they didn't evolve. Because remember, the Gen Xers fell in line. So we didn't have to change for the Gen Xers. They did what we told them to do. But then the millennials get here, and I have so many employers that say to me, can you come in and fix these dang millennials? Like, can you just get them to meet my expectations, because they need to be more loyal, they need to have better work ethic, they need to be more professional, that type of thing. When in reality, the business, a lot of times in those particular cases, the business hasn't evolved with the workforce as fast, right? I'm sure things have changed. A lot of companies, oh, well, you know, we let them wear jeans on Friday now. So yes, they have evolved, but still not to the speed and the depth in which the workforce today is going to demand and expect. And then if we think about who's hiring, if you have a lot of hiring competition, talent competition in your field, in your industry, in your area, then you have to work harder. You have to work harder to get people. You have to be even more attractive for that, okay? All right, so Rick's got a question. How can Rotary enhance its appeal to millennials and Gen Zers? Excellent question. I've been asked this several times. So there's a spectrum of traditional mindset, and at the other end of that spectrum, I call it the millennial mindset, but it's really just that evolved workforce. So it includes Gen Z and whatnot. Okay. So if we think about where folks are coming from, it depends on the way you were raised. And if people were raised in a more traditional environment with traditional parenting, you know, both parents in the home, baby boomers, for example, they were raised with some technology advancements. But if we look at record players, for example, boomers had records as children, and they had records through high school. They had records into early adulthood. Okay, so those formative years, they were playing records. You look at my life, when I started, you know, when my life started, there was a huge technology boom that happened. I started with cassettes, then I went to CDs, Then we started listening to music on Napster on the cloud. Then I asked for an iPod for my 21st birthday, and I was forced to adapt and evolve quickly. When, by the time I got to high school, those big boom boxes from the 80s had gotten smaller and smaller, and it was hard to even find something that would play a cassette if you still had a cassette. So I say that because our comfort level with change and our speed of evolving was ingrained in us as children. We were kind of forced, like, out with the old, in with the new. Where many of the baby boomers, and of course Gen X kind of falls in between that, somewhere in between, but many of the baby boomers, as an example, might be less comfortable with change and or less comfortable with technology because the pace of change was much slower during their formative years. And that really makes a difference. During those first 20 years of your life, it really shapes how you see the world. So the millennials, this is why we have to think of how can we be more current? How can we change? How can we be more relevant today? And for all organizations like Rotary that are very deep-rooted in tradition, I'm going to say something that might not be your favorite thing that I say today. But some of those traditions might need to be let go because it could be scaring people away of how traditional, or the perception is how rigid it is, okay? The tradition is very noble, but a younger person looking at a very old organization, a very deep-rooted organization like Rotary, then they're going to see it as more rigid and more old school, more traditional, and might not be attracted to that, okay? As an example, and this is something you have to talk about and think about, as an example, the statistics show that younger people are less tied to religion. So if you are going to, if you're going to pray at the beginning of meetings, people who are not religious may find that very off-putting and may not want to come back because they feel like it's a religious organization. And so the Rotary and other groups like that have to decide, are we a religious organization and we're only trying to attract religious young people? Or are we a more inclusive group and we want to make everyone feel welcome, right? Does this make sense? Again, I'm not judging, I'm giving you a perception. I'm giving you one perspective on things that you have to think about of who are we, what tradition do we want to hold on to, and versus how do we want to evolve. It's a balance. It's totally a balance of what do we uphold versus how much do we evolve for the younger folks that we want to be in our organization. So I hope the leadership team is having those conversations at the global level, the national level, the local chapter levels, and all of that. Because I've had this same conversation with several Rotary groups across the country and things like that. So also the JCs, if you were familiar with that from years ago, it's kind of like YPAL here in Louisville. I was a JC member in Indianapolis for years, and I worked with the global JCs group on this exact problem because they said the same thing, like, how do we get young people involved because they think we're so old school, So I would recommend having serious conversations about it, task forces, those kind of things. So Delene wants to know if anybody else still has their 8-track player. That's great. So, and Angela said, from her experience, generations like to know their immediate impact. Yes, from the service and investment of time. Absolutely. They want to know that what they're doing is not just coming to meetings, but that they're actually changing the world and making that impact. So, yes, yes, yes. Now, if you haven't picked up on it already, I've kind of mentioned this a couple times, or kind of as not clearly, but it's not about your birth year, okay? The generational conversation is no longer about birth year. It's about your mindset. That spectrum that I talked about, traditional mindset versus millennial mindset, it's more about how were you raised, as I mentioned, and how do you see the world? What is your lens here? So you can't just see somebody who's obviously, late 20s, early 30s coming into an interview and you think, oh, well, she's a millennial, so I bet she's entitled and has no loyalty and, all of these things. No, it's not. That may not be true. My husband is younger than I am, so he is a millennial by birth year, according to data, but he is really a baby boomer trapped in a millennial body, okay? He is what we call an old soul. So it is so important that we do not judge people just based on, oh, well, that person's, in their 60s or 70s. I bet he's super boomer. Well, maybe not. Maybe he has millennial tendencies and he loves change and loves Apple products and, things like that. So you never know. We don't want to judge people just based on that birth year. But it is true that the data is done for a reason. The generational data is done because people born in a similar time, in a similar place, tend to have a similar upbringing and a similar outlook on life. I will say that moving forward with Gen Z, Gen Z is going to be the most diverse group we've ever seen from a generational standpoint, because it depends on how they were raised from a socioeconomic standpoint, education levels, racial differences, like all kinds of diversity you can think of. That is going to be the most diverse group ever. It's going to be much harder to put them in a bucket, even for research and whatnot. So just keep that in mind as well. So couple more examples I just want to share with you. Think about also the work-life balance. Most of the organizations that I work with have male leaders. Most of them have more male leaders than female. And when I'm working with those groups, I will often ask, how many of you had a stay-at-home spouse that allowed you the opportunity to work late and work extra and really grow your career and grow your company? And so often they are like, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. My wife stayed at home when the kids were little, They'll tell me those kind of examples. Well, today, again, we need to understand today's workforce, because more often than not, both people are working, right? The moms and the dads. We're now seeing a lot of companies give paternal leave to the fathers when the women have babies, which is fantastic. And then you also have a lot of single parents or blended families where they have the kids on certain days of the week. And that just wasn't the case as much 30 plus years ago. So now we really, really need to think about the true work-life balance and the workload that we are putting on people. Is it possible to work that much and be responsible for that much when they have a family or other priorities? I'm seeing a ton of people change jobs, both millennials and Gen Xers, some boomers even, change jobs because the workload got too great, too demanding, and they couldn't take it anymore. So be really careful about that piece. And the loyalty piece, I'll kind of wrap up with this one here, because we've got to stop judging people about a lack of loyalty, because most young people don't even know what loyalty looks like. I never saw loyalty as a child. Divorce peaked in the 1980s, and my parents split when I was 11. Then the 1990s brought on globalization caused by the internet, and tons of companies were offshoring, outsourcing, centralizing, decentralizing, all those different things. And my mom, who's a corporate accountant, she got laid off 3 times before I hit college. So she told me, don't ever depend on a company. Don't ever depend on a spouse, right? She said, you look out for yourself. Don't get blindsided by a layoff, right? That kind of thing. So just understand that the younger workers, we were raised differently. We were raised that it's probably not in our best interest to stay at a company for more than 5 or 10 years. Remember back to that 2 to 3% pay increase? Sometimes it's not financially in your best interest to stay. Other times, it's not in your best interest to stay and become too deep-rooted in that organization that could let you go any day. My mom, when she got cut, it was her entire department being eliminated. It had nothing to do with her performance. Her entire department was outsourced. So there was nothing she could do about that. So instead, you got to make sure your people are keeping their skills up and that you as a leader and organization are continuing to evolve over time, and that we understand this employer-employee relationship today. Folks, it's got to be mutually beneficial. It can't be one-sided. Well, I shouldn't have to thank my people. That's why they get a paycheck. Are you kidding? They can go anywhere and get a paycheck today. So we do have to step up and thank our people for the work that they're doing. Aren't we truly grateful for the ones who show up and do a good job? Of course we are. So we have to ratchet up the recognition and appreciation of our folks. We've got to build out some new stepping stones. I mean, these are the things we work with clients all the time. If you're really interested in this too, my book, Staying Power, is on Amazon. So you can get that. It's got a bunch of the retention strategies, millennial mindset stuff as well. But, you've got to figure out new ways to create carrots, to create stepping stones. Make sure your management is solid, man. If you have cut training and development for your managers and supervisors, you just destroyed yourself, because the managers and supervisors are the number one influencers as to whether people stay or go. So if you're not developing your leaders into people that staff want to work for, you can't possibly create a place where people want to work, especially this younger generation that is going to take advantage of other opportunities and a shiny new carrot that somebody's hanging down the street for them. Okay, so, all right, I think some questions came in here. By the way, you guys can pop off at 1 o'clock, but I can stay as long as you want to keep talking. Well, maybe not all day, but at least another 30 to 60 minutes. So Tom says, observation many traditional groups have made, millennials are less interested in joining something than other generations. You're exactly right. They're motivated by the cause. So yes, I think a great motivator and a recruiting tool is going to be the mission and the cause of what you guys do, that community service and things like that. So of course you guys are all about your mission. So maybe featuring that. Yes, 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 yes. Susan said, good point. We are very mission and service based. Yes. Then Rick said, passport clubs emphasize service rather than attendance. Yes. So if you have attendance rules, that could be a barrier for folks. I've seen that with lots of groups that are struggling because they can't hit their attendance numbers. Well, it might be because they are a parent or have workout schedules or whatever else that's a priority for them. Julie, what is the driving force behind millennials? Money, success, or feeling they make a difference? Great question. So the top ones that keep coming up on most surveys is really they want to make a difference, they want challenging work, and they want career advancement. But we can get really creative with advancement. It doesn't have to be a promotion. It could be mentorship. It could be cross-training. It could be going to conferences, networking, opportunities for online learning and things like that. So there's lots of different things. If you're a sales organization like financial advisors and insurance agents and folks like that, you need to find millennials who are money driven, because that is what drives the production in that space. If you're not trying to hire salespeople, then you probably are going to find that people would prefer to have more mentorship, career advancement, challenging projects, the mission, those kind of things. But I would survey for that. We have assessments, we do not only DISC assessments, but motivator assessments that help gauge those things. So don't make assumptions. You can't put millennials into the same bucket, okay, on those things. So when we look at applicant resumes, how many company shifts are too many? It depends on what your threshold is, your own personal threshold. But I will say that what used to be a job hopper is not anymore. So if people stay 2 to 3 years in a job, in most industries, I would say that's not a job hopper. If they're moving more often than 2 years, and the data says that most millennials don't hit the 2-year mark. So if you're millennials that you're hiring are staying longer than 2 years, you're doing better than average, okay? But you have to really think about, why did they leave those other places? If you ask them why they left, they're going to tell you whether it was relationships with the management or team, whether it was lack of advancement. That's a huge reason for people to leave. Sometimes it's pay, but more often it's, I felt stuck. I had nowhere else to go there. Okay, is training opportunity seen as recognition or a burden? For most younger workers, training is seen as, I wouldn't say recognition, but it's no longer a perk or a nice to have. It's like, well, how are you gonna upskill me? What are you doing to invest in me as your staff member to get better at my job, to understand the industry better, build my network and those things. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's recognition or a burden. I think it's more of a must-have. It's kind of a baseline thing that you need to have a budget for how much you're investing in each of your folks, for training, for conferences, education, tuition reimbursement, things like that. So,
Cara,
I'm trying to get. Go ahead, Julie.
I'm just going to say thank you so much. This has been so enlightening. I know our members would love to continue on. For those that would like to, we can get in touch with you. And we just want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. It's been great.
Thank you.
And I also want to remind everyone to please consider who to invite and register for the upcoming Business Synergy events. Thanks to Mike Richardson and Jay Mallory for organizing. I know you and your guests will enjoy this special opportunities. So be thinking about those members to invite. And to everyone, thank you so much. We're going to be adjourning the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all.